Now, let's start. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the sixth session of our online workshop on Wittgenstein's philosophy in times of crisis. My name is Haiqiang Dai, and I will be the moderator today. This online workshop aims to bring together Wittgenstein scholars all over the world to reflect the current global crisis we are facing from different perspectives of Wittgenstein's philosophy. It's organized by an international team of young researchers. Our team members are Saori and Wei from Japan, Danka and David from Germany, and me from China. You can find our member Wei and Danka here. Before we start, I would like to ask you to keep yourself muted during the whole session, but you can turn your camera on if you would like to. For the discussion, it would be helpful if you can write down your questions or comments at chat. Thanks for your cooperation. Today's session consists of a talk about 1 hour, followed by a 15 minutes comment, and then a general discussion with 2 hours in total. Now, I'm really excited to introduce our speaker today, Professor Jiang, who works at Shanxi University, China, and he's now a visiting professor at UC Berkeley. Professor Jiang is not only a distinguished Wittgenstein scholar, but also has broad philosophical interests, including history of analytical philosophy, philosophy of cognitive science, and artificial intelligence. Today, he will give us a talk titled as Uncertainty as a New Normal in Late Wittgenstein's Philosophy, which I think is perfectly conforming to our workshop's purpose. Also, we are very glad to have Professor Alfred Nordmann to be the commentator today. As you may know, he already gave us a talk before. His time now is 2 a.m. in the morning. We really appreciate for this kind of support. And thanks for coming again. Now, please join me in welcoming Professor Jiang. Please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Haiqiang, and for your introduction, and thank Professor Alfred Nordmann for your accepting of invitations to you as the commentator today. And thanks all organizers, Wei Zhen, Danke, and also David and Soren. So today, I will talk about the uncertainty as a new normal in later Wittgenstein's philosophy. So first of all, I just want to talk about the background of this topic. Actually, so I think this topic should be very close to the purpose of this event, just like Haiqiang mentioned, because this is the very specific times for us to face challenge of the changing. For example, so how could we do in philosophy and others? And so the first question is about what needs to be done to get us back to be normal. So that is just in the sociological sense to raise such a question. And but we just want to know how to face this situation as a philosophers in these times. So actually, so what we can do in the new situation, I call it the new normal. The new normal that means that so everyone should face. That means we have the new criterions, new norms, or new rules for us to do everything. So here, I just want to say a very brief about what it means by the old normal or just normal. I mean this in the historical sense rather than philosophical sense. But for us as a philosophers, we should do much about how could we do in our research when we are facing the time of the crisis today. So that is a philosophical sense. And I found that article published, written by Albert Podgorski, Jiang mentioned to me about normative uncertainty and the dependence problem in mind this year. And I just want to mention this paper because we want to talk about uncertainty in the normal way rather than in an unnormal way. And finally, I just want to mention that what Wittgenstein said about uncertainty in his last writing on certainty. So actually today, I will focus on the last writing of Wittgenstein in his later life on certainty. So today, I will give some explanation of uncertainty in different ways. The first about the aim and the structure of the book in perspectives from the different philosophers' interpretations. And the second, I will give my moderate interpretation. And the third part, I will talk about different views of uncertainty from different fields. Finally, I will focus on the uncertainty as a new normal in Wittgenstein's view. First of all, let's look at the aim of the structure of the uncertainty. So I will give four patterns of explanations of the book. One, orthodox interpretation by Norman Markham in his famous and influential Ludwig Wittgenstein memorial. And the second, about the skeptical interpretation by Sir Kripke in his Wittgenstein on Rules and Private Language. The third one is the non-skeptical interpretation by Stanley Cavell and John McDowell. And the last one is a new interpretation by Daniel Moyer Sharot in her understanding of Wittgenstein on certainty. Now, let's look at first the orthodox interpretation by Norman Markham in his book. So in his book, he mentioned that the uncertainty concerns largely on epistemistical dimension. That means that there are something which must be exempt from doubt in order for human practice to be possible, including the activity of raising doubts. So he focused on the quotation from the book, a doubt that doubted everything would not be a doubt. So we will explain this sentence or this preparation later in details. And in Norman Markham's explanation, he mentioned that the book, that means the uncertainty, takes as its starting point the here is one hand argument made by G. Moore and examines the rule of knowledge claims in human language, particularly of certain empirical preparations, now called Moorean preparations or Moorean certainties. But here, I just want to mention that in Markham's explanation, the important outcome is Wittgenstein's claim that all thought is embedded in underlying beliefs, and therefore the most radical form of thought must be rejected, since they form contradiction within the system that praised them. Wittgenstein also sketched novel refutations of philosophical skepticism in various views. Actually, we can find in Markham's explanation has some hint to the next explanation, that is the skeptical interpretation by Sir Kripke. In Kripke's work, rules for interpretation rules provide no help because they themselves can be interpreted in different ways, or as Wittgenstein himself put it, any interpretation still hands in along with what is the interpreter interprets and cannot give it support. Interpretations by themselves do not determine meaning, so from investigations. But the power of Kripke's example is that in mathematics, the rule for the use of expressions appear to be defined clearly for the infinite number of cases. Kripke doesn't question the mathematical validity of the plus function, but rather the meta-linguistic usage of plus. So what factor can we point to that shows that the plus refers to the mathematical function plus? That means we just use the plus as mathematical function rather than as a linguistic use. So following David Hume, Kripke distinction between two types of solution to skeptical paradox. That is a straight solution and a skeptical solution. So the first solution dissolves the paradox by rejecting one or more of the premises that lead to them. And skeptical solutions accept the truth of the paradox, but argue that it does not undermine our ordinary beliefs and practice in the way it seems to. Because Kripke thinks that Wittgenstein endorsed the skeptical paradox, so he is committed to the view that Wittgenstein offers a skeptical and another straight solution. So that's why we call Sir Kripke's interpretation to be skeptical. The third one is a non-skeptical interpretation by Cavell and McDowell. So we can find in the Cavell's claim that Wittgenstein was disappointed with the delivering potation of knowledge. This subject has been extensively treated by him under the head of skepticism. So for him, Wittgenstein is not skeptical in the classical epistemological sense. He rather articulated the truth of skepticism, which is that our relation to the world as a whole or to others in general is not one of knowing, where knowing construes itself as being certain. So this allows for the anti-skeptical or theoretical position, according to which there is no philosophical problem with respect to one's grasping the meaning of speakers' words. So there have been quite some discussion about the right way to read uncertainty, and it has been argued that this last book represents a new phase in his thinking called the third Wittgenstein. So sometimes we call the philosopher, just like the Cavell, McDowell, and others, to claim the third Wittgenstein philosophy. Finally, is about the new interpretation by Danielle Mary Sherrod in her Understanding Wittgenstein Uncertainty, published in 2004. In her book, she explained the third or the last masterpieces on certainty has major implications for philosophy. She said it elucidates Wittgenstein's ultimate thought on the nature of our basic beliefs and his demystification of skepticism. Our basic certainty are shown to be non-epistemical or non-propositional attitude that as such have no verbal occurrences, but manifest themselves exclusively in our actions. This fundamental certainty is a belief in a primitive confidence or root trust or your trust whose practical nature bridges the heritable unresolved categorical gap between belief and action. So according to her interpretation, much of uncertainty is devoted to flesh out the distinction between certainty and knowledge. Yeah, of course, she focused on the hinge propositions in uncertainty and investigations. According to her interpretation, in uncertainty, Wittgenstein is criticizing the idea that there is no knowledge because everything can be doubted. We need to talk about that kind of skepticism, the obsessive doubt kind of skepticism. We might refer to the kind of skepticism Wittgenstein is rejecting as doubt skepticism. So we can find in the Daniel Sharrock, she explained the uncertainty as to be the new skepticism. But actually, I don't think that all of interpretations are right. Actually, I just want to give my moderate interpretation according to Anscombe and von Wright edition of the book on certainty. So I can give the 4 parts. Actually, the 4 parts has been done by Anscombe and von Wright. But I just use the 4 parts to make it clear how could we understand the themes in uncertainty. So in the first part, it's about misuse of I know for making certain preparations. According to Wittgenstein, we cannot question for certainty what is happening. It is nonsensical to raise any question for certainty on knowledge. 2 cases can be highlighted on this point. One is immediate experience or particular situation at which we use I know that preparation to refer to some immediate or practical things. So as in our experiences, we can feel some particular things or particular situation in which we can say, I know something or some person. Another case is in mathematical preparation, which are shown to validate at any moment. So I quote some sentences from uncertainty. For example, so I know often means I have a proper ground for my statement. So if the other person is acquainted with the language game, he would admit that I know. The other, if he is acquainted with the language game, must be able to imagine how one may know something of the kind. So another quotation I quote here, if, however, one wanted to give something like a rule here, then it would contain the expression in normal circumstance. And we recognize normal circumstance but cannot precisely describe them. At most, we can describe the range of abnormal ones. That means maybe we will be wrong. Will be wrong on our description. And this is the first part about the how could we use I know for making certain preparations. And second part is about distinction of belief and knowledge. I think it's very important for Wittgenstein to deal with certainty and uncertainty. So let's look at the distinction. What is a distinction at all? So could we say knowledge could be wrong, but belief not? Of course, we know knowledge is a relation of a knower with a fact rather than with a sense of preparation. That means belief. Here, certainty is such a thing that one could not find any opposite, even though the preparation for certainty could not be expressed in its own way. That means we can't find any opposite to our certain preparation. That means actually we couldn't find the preparation to be wrong. The preparation to be wrong in this way. So this preparation actually is in Wittgenstein. It's not a preparation of fact, but of belief. So he used the methodology, methodology of riverbed. So the methodology of riverbed consists of belief rather than knowledge. In section 19.7, Wittgenstein said the methodology may change back into state of fluid state. The riverbed of thought may shift, but I distinction between the movement of water on the riverbed and the shift of the bed itself, though there is not a sharp division of the one from the other. Also, in uncertainty, Wittgenstein clarified uncertainty as a riverbed. That means there is no doubt you could raise. All doubts are caused by fact that make our preparation true or false. Uncertainty does not belong to the same level with certainty. That is, it's because of lack of a shortage of facts that one is uncertain of some of these preparations, which are certain some facts in which of their absence. So we can find uncertainty is of preparation rather than of facts. Certainty is concerned with beliefs, but uncertainty with knowledge, and doubt with fact or facts. So we can find certainty and uncertainty are different categories, or they are on the different level. Now let's look at the next point of Wittgenstein shown us in uncertainty, that is about to believe and to know. So for Wittgenstein, when we say I know something, including or presuppose that I believe. So if certainty is based on our beliefs of fact, how does it count for uncertainty of preparations? So that is my question to Wittgenstein. Is it to know to believe? According to Wittgenstein, he admits that's a preparation. That means from section 177, we can find 177. So what I know, I believe. That means, so when I say I believe, that means what I believe is what I know. To believe is mean to having a system of beliefs in which one could believe in something rightly. So we can find in Wittgenstein, sometimes he argued for believing to be knowing. So if we say I believe something, that means I know something in advance. And the third part about the distinction is about distinction of certainty and the truth. So as we said in the early part, so we can find Wittgenstein put certainty to be of beliefs, and uncertainty to be of facts. So of course we can say truth should be about facts rather than belief. So we couldn't say, oh, he has belief which is false. So we just say he has some proposition which is fact, which is false. But we couldn't say he has a belief which is false or true or true. Here, Wittgenstein wants to say subject certainty and objectivity, respectively. So what difference is there between? Subject certainty guarantee complete convention, while object certainty guarantee no mistake. So here we can find Wittgenstein to use the mistake in our language game. So in our language games, of course, we would make mistakes. So uncertainty should be relative our language game rather than to facts. So here, the truth is valid only for what is grounded. This is the second point about the distinction of certainty and the truth. The truth is valid only for what is grounded, but not for the ground itself. The ground is certain for its own sake, for there is no truth or falsehood for the ground itself. So let's look at his preparation from section 200. Usually, the preparation is either true or false, only means that it must be possible to decide for or against it. But this does not say what the ground for such a decision is like. So we can find about truth or falsehood to be relevant to the what is grounded, but not the ground itself. Also, we can find Wittgenstein give us some point about how could we talk about to doubt and to know. So let's look at this question. Does knowing means that there is no ground to doubt what one knows? If so, what difference is there between doubting and knowing? So sometimes we could say to doubt means that one could give reason to question anything ungrounded. But it is subjective to doubt something based on the subject's reason. In contrast, to know means subject the ground objectively. So we can find some preparation from uncertainty. For example, in section 253, and the foundation of well-founded belief lies belief that is not founded. So actually that means as we know in the beginnings about there's no doubt for our doubt itself. And also in section 254, 72, he mentioned, I know equals I'm familiar with as the certainty. That means I know, that means I have no doubt. I have no doubt with my knowing. So this is the foundation. This is the foundation of belief. And we can find the other point about the certainty and the hostile empirical preparations. So we can find in this way, Wittgenstein somehow confused with his ideas before. That means he mentioned we can find something familiar with us, but we couldn't refer to some others and anyone else or others to be familiar with what we are familiar with. So that means, so as he said in section 286, these people, that means other people, different from us, do not know a lot that we know, and let them never be sure of their belief. They are wrong and we know it. If we compare our system of knowledge with theirs, then theirs is evidently the power one by far. So actually, I don't think Wittgenstein right here. How could we compare two systems just according to our knowledge? So I doubt Wittgenstein here. And the last part from his propositions is about distinction of knowledge and certainty. This is the last part of uncertainty. I think for Wittgenstein, knowledge contains no reason to doubt. It's concerned with reasons. Certainty means no doubt on what one believes to know at all. So it's concerned not with reason, but with thought. Thus, we are playing different games with knowledge and certainty. That means we are playing different games when we talk about knowledge and certainty. So that means knowledge, when we talk about knowledge, when we use the sentence, I know something, that means, it means that so I have some reason. I have some reason to believe it. But when we talk about uncertainty, certainty, so we couldn't say we have some reason to doubt. In contrast, we have no reason to doubt in certainty. So, and also for Wittgenstein, knowledge contains the possibilities for justification of what one knows, that there would be wrong or impossible for knowledge, but certainty contains no possibility to ask for justification or unjustification of what is certain. So you can find that also there is difference between knowledge and certainty for him. And also I want to mention in section 308 about knowledge and certainty, he said clearly, knowledge and certainty belong to different categories. They are not two mental states like saying, summary and being sure. What interests us now is not being sure, but knowledge. That is, we are interested in the fact that about certain empirical propositions, no doubt can exist if making judgments to be possible at all. Actually, we know this sentence refers to G. Moore's proposition about about the fact. So I have a head, or I have the other hand, and so on. So actually, so Wittgenstein said all the preparations are about knowledge, but not on certainty. Here, he also said, I'm inclined to believe that not everything that has a form of empirical preparation is one. And also, Wittgenstein wants to give us some very different uses of the sentences in different contexts. So he, according to his ideas, context provide us with ordinary use of sentences correctly. I think the meaning of the sentence would change in different contexts. So it's natural. We can see context give us some context give us some reasons to change the meaning of sentence. So the context determine the meaning of the sentence. Sometimes so we can see that, which shows the openness of the meaning. But on the other hand, the meaning is also determined in context dependently. In this sense, the meaning of the sentence is both determinate and flexible in context. So how could we explain the contradiction between them? It is certain of the dependence of the meaning to context and uncertain of the possibility of change in meaning in flexible context. Actually, this is the solution from Wittgenstein's point about the contradiction of determination and flexibility. The former is of generality for all sentences, but the latter of particularity for each sentence. That means, in general speaking, so we can say all sentences could be or should be or would be determined in context. But actually, for each sentence, we can say we have some flexible choices for the meaning of the sentence in different contexts. So it concluded that the uncertainty is the other sign, but not the opposite of certainty, just like the other side of a coin. So we could put uncertainty as the opposite to certainty, but we used to be using such comparison of certainty and uncertainty, just according to the literature interpretation. And let's look at the section 392. What I need to share is that the dot is not necessary even when it is possible. That the possibility of a language scheme doesn't depend on everything being dotted that can be dotted. So this is connected with the rule of contradiction in mathematics. So we can find in Wittgenstein, he gave us some explanation about how could we use dot in our ordinary language different from mathematical language. And also finally, he gave us some point about certainty as attitude. I think it's a very interesting point here. He said, I want to say it's not that on some points men know that the true with perfect certainty. No, perfect certainty is only matter of their attitude. So I think it's a very interesting point here about attitude to be interpreted to use to interpret certainty in this way. So he said, I am trying to say something that sounds like pragmatism. Here I am being thwarted by a kind of Wissenschaft. So I want to see Wittgenstein has some intention to agree with pragmatist point about something uncertainty. And also in his in the section of 519, he said, therefore, in order for you to be able to carry out the order, there must be some empirical fact about which you are not in doubt. Blah, blah. I don't want to repeat the quotation. So from this preparations, we can find that he focused on the truth and the falseful to be dependent on fundamental empirical facts. And also he focused on knowledge in language games. And as he said, the concept of knowledge is coupled with that of language game. So actually we can find when he used the term knowledge, actually he is thinking of language game. That means he used the term as a term in a language game. So from
我在听讲座，给你吃，再给你一块。
From here we can find he said, I know that I'm quite familiar with, again, it's certainty so. So I know is relative to I believe, or what I know is relative to what I believe. I believe means that I'm quite familiar with what I know. So because we have some certainty about what I believe, so we can see for Wittgenstein, we can see some knowledge is relative to some belief. Of course, we can see that is a game or language game in which Wittgenstein used the different terms. But actually, so we can find Wittgenstein wants to show us the way to solve the problems G. Morse raised or is facing. That means when I say I know something, actually it's not a good preparation for us about fact, but about our belief. Next part, I just want to mention some different views of uncertainty. So I just want to give some very brief point about the views, very quick because of time. So first of all, so Wittgenstein actually has some, I mentioned before, has some intention to be pragmatist interpretation of uncertainty. For example, so Julie D. Law, in his article, Uncertain Grounds, Wittgenstein Uncertainty and the New Literature Pragmatism, in his article, he wants to see that Wittgenstein's central point is that the human certainty generally consists in the absence of doubt rather than in logical refutation of doubt. So he said, certainty is not something we come to acquire. It's something we must already have had in order to learn something. At the deepest level, it's not the decision to accept, but the acceptance that is never questioned. So we can find he just wants to use the Wittgenstein idea to compare with a pragmatist interpretation of doubt. And also the other philosopher John Werber, in his article, Wittgenstein Dewey and the Practical Foundation of Knowledge, he said that Wittgenstein argues that language games are grounded in our practical actions, in certainties which we do not doubt. Indeed, he liked this pragmatic reactions to the fact of the taking hold of the tool. In the beginning, we just act in a certain way, and this is condition for the subsequent linguistic refinement and normative assessment. So for the author, doubt as a contradictionary of certainty is something we can resolve by transforming it into a problem. That's a Dewey's suggestion, the initial step of inquiry. So actually, though he thought the Dewey has some different point or start point from Wittgenstein's, but actually this comparison of Wittgenstein and Dewey has some very interesting points. So how could we, in understanding Wittgenstein's ideas about uncertainty with pragmatist doubt? And also, the other author, James Taylor, in his article on uncertainty, so he clearly mentioned that the pragmatist philosophers called for the acceptance of uncertainty as dimension of any human induced to understand reality rather than the hindrance to process. So he didn't compare clearly a pragmatist idea with Wittgenstein, but from his article we can find there are some hint about pragmatist approach with approach has some similar point with Wittgenstein ideas on uncertainty. So all the authors focus on Dewey's idea. So we can find some very bright paper by Dewey in 1916, The Needful Recovery of Philosophy. In this paper, Dewey focused on uncertainty in 5 approaches. That means he wants to explore the human knowledge in different ways. So in the 4 point, we can find in the 4 point, he mentioned uncertainty and disengagement, entanglement. So we can see Dewey wants to explore the uncertainty and wants to explore how to use uncertainty to inquire our knowledge in his logic. But I don't think Dewey has some agreement with Wittgenstein, even though Wittgenstein, maybe he was familiar with pragmatics, just like James Dewey's philosophy, rather than William James' philosophy rather than John Dewey's. But actually, I don't think we can make such a very clear comparison of Wittgenstein ideas with John Dewey's. And the second comparison from others is about the comparison between Wittgenstein and Kierkegaard. So in Kierkegaard's great book, The Concept of Anxiety, so we can find some very interesting point from Kierkegaard. But actually, Kierkegaard is not concerned with uncertainty as the step or process of knowledge, but of theology or our sin. So we can find some paragraph from his book, but I don't think we have time to discuss this point in more detail. And also we can find some comparison with Wittgenstein ideas with some contemporary neurosciences. So I find this article online about Wittgenstein's certainty. So in this article, the author said Wittgenstein chose as his primary example of certainty the fact that the schools of normal people are filling with neural tissue, not sawdust. In 1980, the British pediatrician John Luber reported that some normal thoughts apparently occurs of children hydrocephaly had no more than 5% of volume of normal brain tissue. So according to this finding, Wittgenstein's certainty has become uncertain. So this is a good comparison for us to think about Wittgenstein's idea on uncertainty and certainty. But I don't think it has helped for us to understanding his idea, Wittgenstein's ideas in philosophical way. Finally, I want to make clear about Wittgenstein's view on uncertainty in his philosophy, in his later philosophy, of course, from uncertainty. So we can find some points here. For the opposite of uncertainty is doubt rather than uncertainty. So I mentioned before, uncertainty is not a kind of mental state which is filled with doubts. Uncertainty is concerned with knowledge, where it has such a form of sentence as I don't know whether it is or not. In this sense, uncertainty is on the level of knowledge rather than belief. In contrast, certainty is about our beliefs that constitute the foundation of knowledge. So knowledge is derived from and verified by our experience, but belief is from our form of life, which is a foundation of experiences. Knowledge makes us be certain of things in the world through our experience of environment. This is the first point I want to mention about uncertainty and certainty in Wittgenstein's view. The center of the point is the distinction of the two categories. And also there is another distinction about the subjective and objective certainties. So subjective and objective certainties are about our convictions which bring about truth and the falsehood of propositions of things in the world. So in case that there's no mistake in objective certainty, it could be for our convictions to be true or false in such certainty. But for uncertainty, there's no truth or falsehood, neither at all. There's only suspense or anxiety in our mental state of uncertainty. So we can find, even we make a distinction between subjective and objective certainties, we should know uncertainty is different from certainty, not in knowledge, but in belief. So uncertainty provides us with a sense of reality by which we question what is happening or will happen in the future. It means that it is just what we feel uncertain that gives us some sense about what happened to us in particular contexts or situations, and in the sense of existing ourselves in reality, just like anxiety or annoyance make us know what the situation we are in. Uncertainty makes us be like a fly in the fly bottom who tries to find a way out of the bottle. Uncertainty is also the case that we are not enough knowledge about what is happening or will happen in the future, which is beyond the truth and the forceful of them. So just like now, so there are so many uncertainties for us to know. So how could we how could we live in a pandemic? So actually, just because we have no enough knowledge about what is happening or will happen in the future. The third point is about uncertainty and experience. While our actions follow from rules which determine what kind of language games we are playing in action, the rules do not determine what kind of action we are doing. It means, or just means, that it is uncertain about what action we will do next in the language game. It's natural, for example, that no rule would determine how far or how high a ball would be hit in a golf game. It's normal that we play golf differently in each game. In this sense, the consequences of our action in a game are uncertain for a player in a game, so that the uncertainty is normal for players in the game. So, in a game, rules could be could determine what the player do, but they could or they couldn't determine what the player will do next. Experiences has a significant role in our language games. We play games through experience as well as following rules. So rules of game regulate norm of game by which we know how to play the game generally. Experience teach us what happened in such a game in the past, but does not tell us what will happen in the future. So rules illuminate the general situation of the game, while experience tell us what has happened in the particular case. However, no rule and experience could teach us what we should do next in the game. It means that it's uncertain or unexpected to be what will happen in the future. What experience teaches us is such a lesson that no final decision could be made without any attempt to new situations in games. Following a rule is a continued trying to find a way out of intelligent bewilderments in language games, like a fly trying to find a way out of fly bottle. Finally, I just want to mention point about uncertainty and the new normal. So because of the uncertainty of experience as well as knowledge, we could know exactly what will happen next in a game. It's normal that we act in a game according to rules, but it's also known that we always break the rules in playing a game, which will occur some unexpected consequences in the game. These consequences are part of the game, consisting of our actions. On the other hand, situations always change in times. Not only in games need to be changed corresponding to the change of situations, but we need to respond to the change according to our experiences. Thus, it's normal that new situations would occur and that we have to be used to acting and living in new situations. I just want to say that the new normal or uncertainty as a new normal in this sense to be responding to the new situations or new changes in our games. Finally, uncertainty is not what Wittgenstein wants to reject, but that he tries to settle down in certain convictions. He admits the uncertainty of knowledge and suggests searching for certainty in uncertainty. So uncertainty in this sense is instituted in our language games. Language games are concerned with knowledge, which means that they are about the way how we know to use our language rightly in ordinary life. Due to the lack or shortage of knowledge we have on games, it's always uncertain that we could use our language right once forever. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Jiang Yi, for this inspiring and rich talk. And now we have Professor Nordmann for give a comment, please.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I don't have any slides, so you'll just have to listen to my quick response. And indeed, it was a rich and inspiring talk, and it's impossible to address it in its entirety, especially since it offers us a very comprehensive understanding of uncertainty, also the different interpretations, advancing an interpretation of its own, which I find quite interesting, and I think I need to learn much more about. But let me try to kind of draw it back to the question that we started off with the question of the new normal, and let me bring out one specific kind of dimension of it, because it seems to me that in the talk a very important distinction was made, namely that between entering the language game of skepticism, the language game of knowing, the language game of certainty versus uncertainty, as a, you might say, way of assuring ourselves that we are not in error, right? So there's, we all know Wittgenstein's claim that we can only assert something as an item of knowledge when there's also the possibility of error. So somehow when we claim to know something in our beliefs, for example, when we claim to know something, we always open up to a specific kind of language game, a kind of epistemological language game of skepticism, of knowledge and error, and in this sense of uncertainty. And I think this is at least how I understood the presentation, and this has to be distinguished in a very, very important way. And again, this is what I think I learned from the presentation, has to be distinguished in a very important way from a sense of genuine doubt, where doubt is concerns the way in which we are in the world. Doubt concerns the things that we do in practice, and of course many of the things we do in practice, many of the things that are associated with our forms of life, in fact, we do not doubt, indeed, as Wittgenstein says, right? So the question of doubting and having a kind of problematic relationship to our own way of being in the world, of acting and operating, so to speak, in within a certain form of life, has to be distinguished from that sort of, you might say, artificial philosophical language game of assuring myself that I'm not in error. So I think this distinction was also very important to the philosophy of Stanley Cavell, and I very much like that he came up as one of the interpreters of uncertainty. And in fact, I would like to kind of further develop this idea of Cavell, right? Because Cavell also wants to show us that he wants to, in some sense, also demystify this philosophical language game of skepticism by showing that it is divorced from another kind of question that it actually disguises or covers up, right? So he actually thinks of this philosophical language game of skepticism, where we ask ourselves constantly, or where we are supposed to ask ourselves hypothetically, whether or not perhaps we are in error. He actually, in some sense, treats that as a sort of pathology of the modern Western philosophical mind, and in some ways, Cavell does something actually very similar to Wittgenstein, trying to cure us from this pathology, offer it a kind of therapy. But the first step in this kind of curative project is to indeed again show exactly also what the pragmatists were trying to show, that doubt has to be real doubt, right? And real doubt is not just the hypothetical question, do I know for sure that I'm right? But real doubt concerns indeed our expectations, our dispositions to act, our ways of being in the world, and so on. So I think all of this, I'm not entirely sure, but this is sort of what I got out of this very interesting presentation, that we have to mind this distinction, that there are many things in our beliefs are grounded in practice, are grounded in those things that we do not doubt indeed, whereas the question of uncertainty as a kind of sort of hypothetical possibility is always with us, and has a different kind of, it's in a different register. And that's why I think it was very important to point out that certainty and uncertainty are actually not opposed to each other, but that the kind of certainty of being in the world is something rather different and can actually coexist quite happily with this other kind of philosophical game of asking how certain can you really be? Are you sure that you're not in error? Okay, so this distinction having been made, let me now turn to this question of the new normal and our current situation. And let me just try to problematize it a little bit, because to my mind, if we look at our current situation, we are not just looking at issues of uncertainty, which indeed do prevail, as they will always prevail, because we can always enter that language game. So of course, it doesn't just concern what we know about the future, how predictable the future is, and so forth. I think the current new normal does somehow affect us more deeply in our basic anxieties about how we are connected in the world and to the world in practice and in deed. So let me just consider two hinge propositions, right? Two hinge propositions that Wittgenstein might articulate. He didn't, but they might be in that kind of ball game of hinge propositions. And both of these are examples that I take very much from the German context. So the first hinge proposition is to love someone is wanting to be with that person. Okay, so I mean this sounds a bit more like an ethical maxim too, right? But or maybe it's a kind of commonplace practice. So when I love someone, I want to be close to them, right? Very simple. I want to be close to them, also physically close to them, right? So we might also translate that into the very simple proposition that if you love your parents, if you love your grandparents, you should try to visit them as often as possible, right? So this is a very, very kind of basic and trivial insight of a kind of hinge proposition upon which much of our social practices sort of revolve. And of course, we found that in the current situation, this hinge proposition was questioned very, very deeply. And in Germany, actually, our chancellor issued the maxim that said, if you love your parents, do not visit them. If you do love your grandparents, stay away, okay? This is how you express your love, by keeping away from them, okay? Because you might endanger them by getting too close, right? So this is a very deeply disorienting kind of unsettling, I would say, unsettling kind of move is being somehow unsettled. And this is, of course, not epistemic uncertainty, because we are not talking about the question of error or truth here, right? I was not in error believing that if I love my parents, I should be close to them. But it is another kind of being unmoored, being somehow sort of alienated from the world as I thought I knew it, right? So this is a different kind of doubt or anxiety, as the kind of doubt and anxiety that Cavell might entertain. I'll give you one other quick example, because I shouldn't go on too long. The second example is, if you want to be in public and you want to make a public statement, you have to show your face. You have to be present. This is, in fact, in Germany, part of the law. I mean, of course, there's a bit of a fetishism of the face in Western politics sometimes, but in Germany, it's actually a kind of law that in political demonstrations, in particular, you're not actually allowed to disguise yourself. I mean, there's some police rules about that, and the notion is that it's especially racist punks and so forth who will put a scarf around their face and disguise themselves in a political demonstration, right? And this was a kind of commonplace, a hinge proposition of politics and publicity in the German political system, right? And now, of course, and there was actually a real debate about that. We want to have political demonstrations also during the times of COVID, and everyone is supposed to wear masks. And so the question was, how does this go along with our sort of police rules that you're not supposed to disguise yourself during a demonstration? So, so this has to be kind of renegotiated. That's another way you don't have to show your face in order to be public, to be present in the public. So this would be another example of this. So I would say these are forms of doubt, but not forms of doubt in the sense of empirical, of epistemic doubt. It does not involve us in the language game of knowing, and it may not even, in some sense, concern this question of uncertainty as it was discussed just now in the talk. But at the same time, it is also a major sort of way in which we can, I think, read this text by Wittgenstein, this text on uncertainty, which always sort of presents the counter vision to the epistemic game, namely the vision of us being grounded in a world of, in a form of life, in language game, and so forth, in ways in which we do not actually question very basic propositions. And indeed, I think this kind of groundedness, let's call it, is being called into question. And it would be, of course, interesting to see how we can go. And this is the very first question on the first slide, I think, of the presentation we just heard. How do we sort of, in some sense, re-establish, resettle ourselves in the context of these kinds of transformations? So it's more like an add-on, I think, than a critical commentary that I just gave. But I hope still that it is going to be fruitful for the discussion. Thank you.
Okay. Could I make some response? Yeah. Yeah, thank you for Professor Nordmann about your comment and questions about uncertainty. So actually, there are some three questions I think from your comments. One about just how could we use doubting, or in what way we can talk about doubting or doubt in our discussion of preparations. And actually, so I would say for Wittgenstein, so he concentrated doubting or to doubt in the field of knowledge. So we can say we can doubt what we know, but we can't doubt what we believe. So doubting is the keys to our knowledge rather than to our believing. So this is a Wittgenstein idea from his book, and I'm not sure how could we make the distinction between thought and belief. So actually, of course we have doubting. We have, in general speaking, we have many thoughts in our ordinary life, and when we say I know something or I doubt something, that means I have some reason to doubt or have some reason to believe. But I don't know. So how could we say, so I have no reason to doubt, but I just doubt that. So we couldn't do that. We couldn't say that. So actually, when you say I doubt, that means I have some reasons or I have some even some knowledge which I believe is true to doubt what I have heard from others. So that is the use of thought or doubting for us in general cases. But for Wittgenstein, when we talk about knowledge, I think Wittgenstein wants to make clear why he thought G. Morse wrong when he used his propositions. This is my hand, this is the other hand. So I have two hands. So Wittgenstein, no, you couldn't use these two sentences to argue for your foundation of knowledge. This is bad. This is a very bad strategy for arguing for that. So actually, Wittgenstein said you should say why I said I have such proposition, rather than I have two hands. I have two hands, but I have such proposition on which I could say I have no thought on these propositions. But so I agreed with Wittgenstein on this point about knowledge and doubting. So I just wonder how could we do that? How could we do that? This is a question for Wittgenstein. So how could we do that? How, if you say, okay, actually, so you have no doubt about the proposition, just means you believe that rightly or in the right way. But if we want to ask, what do you mean by in the right way, or which way is right for your propositions? So we couldn't give. He couldn't give us a good reason to explain which one is right or which is wrong. But he gave us, actually, so he gave us his solution to this question, just because he said we have some reason to believe in our form of life. Just means we have a form of life, so we should trust us or trust others in believing in form of life. So we have the common form of life, so we can understand each other. So this is his solution to the problem. But I don't think it's the right way, just because it is meant that he is gone beyond the problem of knowledge. So in philosophical way, we should ask, so how could you give a reason to argue for the proposition without doubt? So this is a point I thought. The second question is about how could we understand Cavell's interpretation as skeptical. So in my discussions, I divided his ideas to be the third one as non-skeptical, but I am not sure how could we do that for enough reasons. Just because we say for Cavill actually, as well as for McDowell, they thought that Wittgenstein focused on deed or on action rather than on theory or our knowledge or preparations. So they found that we can talk about Wittgenstein ideas from perspective of action. So theoretic. So he gave the theoretical solution to the puzzle of uncertainty, to the uncertainty, and different from Socrates. So for rejecting Socrates' critical solution, so they proposed the non-skeptical solution to the problem of uncertainty. So I think maybe this is their strategy for this point. Of course, we should say I agreed with you about the methodology of their strategy in their understanding of uncertainty. So I would say this is a new direction for interpreting Wittgenstein philosophy as a whole, from later to the early. So we could say, so they thought that the last writing, uncertainty, is the third phrase of Wittgenstein's philosophy. So they called the third Wittgenstein. So the third Wittgenstein, actually, so I think, of course, I want to mention pragmatics here, just because they use some pragmatist strategy to deal with Wittgenstein's third Wittgenstein in uncertainty. So I'm not sure whether we can do that, but I think it's useful for us to understand Wittgenstein's the new Wittgenstein in a different way. The third question is about the hinge preparations. You mentioned the two examples. So I know in different cultural backgrounds, so we can understand differently just because if I understand the German culture, so I can understand what you said in German. But if you can understand Chinese culture, so you can understand what Chinese spoke. So in different cultural backgrounds, we have different versions of knowledge, even of knowledge. Of course, beliefs consist of form of life, of course. But actually, so when we talk about context, so I mentioned the context several times about how could we use the sense of meaning or meaning of sentences or meaning of preparations should be determined in contexts. But this context means different situations rather than the cultural context. Just because when we talk about, just like when we talk about Wittgenstein, so we have the common, the common background about Wittgenstein philosophy, different from people who didn't know Wittgenstein at all. So we can talk. This is our form of life. But when we talk about the context in particular way, I think we should talk about the particular step in a game. So Wittgenstein show us that we have the rules which guarantee our action in the right way. But the rules the rules couldn't determine what we do, what we will do next. This is very important for us to understand Wittgenstein's point. That means determining and flexibility, determination and flexibility, two kinds of things, seemingly contradictory, but actually they are very close each other. So we couldn't use the one to define, to reject the other, but actually we should use the one to defend, to argue for the other, not to defend the other. So actually, when we can say, okay, we have rules, but why we have the different consequences of game? Rules are same, but the consequences different. Why? What happens in our games? So actually, there are two kind of things. So certainty should be according to Wittgenstein, in the part of belief, but uncertainty should be part of knowledge. So there's two kind of things for Wittgenstein, but sometimes we are confused with them. So when we talk about certainty, we think, oh, okay, the opposite of certainty should be uncertainty. For Wittgenstein, it's not true. It's not true. So that's Wittgenstein want to give us some point about uncertainty in my understanding. Thank you.
If I may just, I know there's probably many questions around. If I may just come back on one small point, because I think we are agreeing on just about everything here, and I find this a very, very productive discussion. But especially if we want to make this distinction that you also ended up with right now, saying certainty belongs to the sphere of belief, right? Uncertainty belongs to the sphere of knowledge, and what I just call the sort of epistemic game of also skepticism. Once we make this distinction, I think what we're coming up with is a kind of ambiguity or ambivalence in the term of doubting, and that takes us back to Cavell, right? So I quite agree with you that once we construct and reconstruct Wittgenstein's text the way you suggest, it doesn't really make sense to say I doubt my beliefs, right? But at the same time, I mean, and this is I think Cavell's point, right? There is also a way of, for example, doubting that someone loves me, right? I'm doubting someone's love, okay, which is different from doubting a belief or a statement or a proposition, right? And this is, of course, for Cavell, the story about King Lear and so on, and his daughters, very important point. And there is a statement which we all know from Wittgenstein where he says that philosophical problems take the form of I don't know my way around. And not knowing my way around. This is sort of, that was sort of this other aspect that I wanted to focus on by saying that when we are talking about the disruptions or the unsettlement produced in this current situation, there is on the one hand the story about uncertainty that you tell, and I fully agree with that, but on the other hand there's also that other story about being in some hands unsettled in regard to knowing our way about the world in this very, very much more elementary way, which does maybe implicate some of our cases. So anyhow, so I just want to leave it at that. I think we tell a bit of a complementary story here when it comes to that final part.
Yeah, I agree with you. And yes, your question is very inspiring about how could we understand the doubting in Cavell sense, rather than in general sense. So, or common sense. So actually, when we use the doubting, I mean, of course, I could say I'm doubting, or I doubt what I know, what I knew, or what I knew. But I couldn't say I doubt what I believe. So if you have believed in something, so you couldn't say I doubt it either. So that is contradictory. So I agreed with that saying about doubting is about knowledge rather than belief. And I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether I catch the point of Cavell's argument, but I think he just wants to show us that Wittgenstein wants to demonstrate the way of action rather than the way of knowing. So if we get some way to act rather than to believe or to know, that means that you have some knowledge of it. If you have no knowledge at all, you couldn't do in this way, or your action should be different. So that's it. I think that's the headline point in his argument, I thought.
Thanks for this wonderful discussion. I saw Professor Naomi Shaman raise her hand.
Yes.
Professor Naomi, yeah, you have the microphone, please.